So it's a great pleasure to be here. My name is David Alexander. I'm a professor over at Rice in the astronomy department, physics and astronomy department, and I'm the director of the Rice Space Institute. And I was very honored to be invited to host particularly this panel because of our guests. As you're probably aware, if you follow any of the space stuff, there's a lot happening in Texas just now. And we're fortunate to have some of the leaders who are helping make that happen. The way I'm going to try and do this is try and keep it conversational. So rather than taking up time in doing big, long introductions, hopefully the resumes and the bios are available to you. I'm just going to let you know who we are. On my immediate right, we have Kathy Leaders. Kathy has a long history with human exploration at NASA, but is currently the general manager of Starbase as part of Space Tech. Then Sassy Duggleby is working locally with, she's the CEO of Venus Aerospace, who are working on a novel hypersonic engine for passenger transport. And at the end, my farthest right is Norman Garza. Norman went from government relations at A&M to be the first executive director of the Texas Space Commission. And I think he's probably covered every square foot of the state by now since he started in July in all his travels. And what we want to do today is just give you there's a lot going on in space overall, but what's happened in the last year or so is the state has stepped up, and we're going to hear a lot about how they're doing that, what their goals are, and so on. But we also want to put it in the context of pumps and pipes and just talk about the kind of broader impact, not just for space, but for healthcare, and for energy and all the things that we talk about here at Pumps and Pipes and you'll hear about today. So what I'd like to do is basically give everyone an opportunity to introduce what they do and why they're here. And I'm kind of going to work in reverse order. So we'll start with Norman because that gives you a big oversight of overview of the Space Commission, and then we'll work back towards me. So Norman, please.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. Good morning. All right. There's still coffee, I think, if anybody needs to make another pass at the table. Like Dr. Alexander said, July 1st was the date I was able to start working at the Texas Space Commission, and I'll do a little history here. First off, the legislature enacted House Bill 3447. It became effective September 1st, 2023, after the last session concluded. And then in March, the governor held a big press conference at Johnson Space Center where he announced Sassy, Kathy, and even David, as well as Dr. Ambrose, who's here, and others that are members of the TARSEC Executive Committee as well. Since March, there's been 8 open meetings of the Texas Space Commission Board of Directors. There are 9, 3 appointed by the governor, 3 by the lieutenant governor, 3 by the House Speaker. Some additional teammates joined in August. We put out an application in September. We had to post rules with the Texas Secretary of State's office. We did that in October. And as of last week, there were over 200 applications that have come in, and those 200 applications equate to $2.9 billion worth of requests. And the SURF grant program funded by the legislature is $150 million. So I'll leave you with that teaser and pick it back up here shortly. Thank you, sir.
And Sassy?
Good morning. So my name is Sassy Duggleby. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Venus Aerospace. Venus is a venture-backed startup. We operate at Ellington Field, so just down I-45 from here. And we are using a next-generation rocket engine to enable ultra-high-speed vehicles. So our ultimate goal, we have the engine that could go from takeoff to super efficient Mach 4 cruise and could push on to Mach 5, 6, 7. We literally moved, before starting Venus, my husband and I are the co-founders. We were both working for Virgin Orbit out in Southern California, launching rockets off 747s. And we moved to Houston, and I don't know that people realize that the Houston Spaceport, which is at Ellington Field, is the only urban spaceport in America. And so we literally are firing rocket engines outside of our hangar door at Ellington on a daily basis. And there's nowhere else in America that you could do that in the middle of the city. So Houston has something really special going on. And so we've literally taken an idea out of academia and pulled it up and have this engine firing. Our ultimate goal is to put it on a commercial vehicle that could do San Francisco to London or San Francisco to Tokyo in 2 hours. But we're starting with hypersonic testing for the Department of Defense, hypersonic engine sales into programs that want to go fast, and then ultimately hoping to get to that 2-hour commercial travel.
Thank you, Sassy. Kathy?
Well, I'm here really with three hats, I guess. I have the hat of being vice chair. I'm lucky enough to have Gwen Griffin, who's chair of the Texas Space Commission, so I'm here also working with Norman as vice chair of the Texas Space Commission. Obviously, I'm also general manager at Starbase for SpaceX, so near and dear to my heart is being able to operate a commercial spaceport in an area that traditionally has not been a space destination. And so, bringing and being able to tell people in the RGV that you can be a rocket scientist is obviously near and dear to my heart. And then 30 years of NASA, I think the thing that's amazing to me is that this is not a NASA-led conference. And I've been going to conferences over the last, 6 months, and over you're seeing companies putting together the needs and the innovation for what may be one of the solutions that the government uses over time. But we're in this really, really, really exciting phase of making the reality. We used to always say, everybody's a space company. Here where actually people are out there finding how they are space companies. And it's not just sponsored by one federal agency, right? It's innovation that's being built from the ground up. And people are finding connections in all kinds of areas of business with that connection. So a very exciting time, and really looking forward to the discussion, David.
Thank you. And I think that's a nice segue to our kind of first panel question. Because we think of ourselves, quite rightly, as a space state. We've got the NASA Johnson Space Center, and in recent years we've got SpaceX, Blue Origin, Venus, and others. But this is a kind of changing dynamic that we're having happen. So I'd like to ask our panel, starting with you, Sassy, what are the major benefits to creating a more vibrant aerospace research and development environment in the state? In particular, how it benefits the state, the access to human capital, and so on.
Yeah, I think I could talk on this for hours, and I'm sure everybody else could.
You guys were very brief at the beginning, so
like,
you have extra time if you need it.
Perfect. I think the first thing is, the high-quality jobs that aerospace brings into the ecosystem. I mean, I was actually looking, aerospace jobs are higher paid on average by at least $20,000, $30,000 than the average workforce position in Texas. And so job creation is a huge one. I think another piece that bringing aerospace R&D is just private sector investment. So I can say from Venus's perspective, we've raised $70 million in venture capital, and that's $70 million of jobs that have come to the state, buying some hardware that weren't elsewhere. And we were in Southern California when we started the company. And so by bringing startups and the startup ecosystem in aerospace to Texas, that is incredible economic development. We now have 70 jobs and a bunch more capital that's growing here in the state. And then the piece that's kind of near and dear to my heart is national security implications. So my husband is a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy Reserves, and he's was brought into the hypersonic conventional prom strike program. And so, the importance of what's going on across the globe, both in space, satellites, within the ecosystem, and hypersonics. I mean, there's incredible opportunities with satellites, defense systems, UAVs that would allow Texas to help continue defending our country and then continue to, push forward technology that keeps our entire globe safe.
No, thank you. And I think one of the things, a lot of folks focus on the funding, and of course we're looking at government funding one way or the other, but I think the importance of the venture fund and how we bring more of that to Texas is something that, to be honest, I think we're a little bit behind the curve for what we have to offer.
I think we're very behind the curve. One of my big pushes has been trying to get more Texas-based capital onto our cap table, and it's been really hard. Yeah. And I'll say, here in this room, Houston people understand energy, and they'll put a lot of money into going to drill more oil, but they don't want to put money into aerospace. But we can get Silicon Valley dollars, or we can get other dollars from around the country. And so I think there's an incredible opportunity for the private investment ecosystem to kind of stretch their boundaries in terms of what they're actually investing in.
Yeah, I think we need a new slogan. It's failure's okay as an option, and try and get that funding in. But I think that's also the intent of the thing for me is to see that the state investment, it's not just about the money, but it's the intent and what's happening here. And I think that's raised an awareness of all these different things. And Kathy, I'll pass the same question on to you for the R&D argument.
Well, so we'll just probably be adding on to each other's questions, right? But I really feel like one of the things that when you are involved in the space community, in particular in getting commercial space going, you are also really pushing barriers that haven't been defined yet. You have to figure out how to have Texas become part of an international community and be able to further develop their methods of having technology and hardware be permeable through their borders. And so it really pushes that whole, in another way, all of that economic value, just like ports do, right? It forces it in a next realm because space, there's no borders in space. So because of that, you have to be able to set up your systems where you can figure out how to get things in and out and be able to support the space community, because it will be a new push, and it will force both the local communities and the state to be able to think about how can we set this up to be able to do business in a quicker, leaner way for a lot of these activities and to be able to make the space companies' jobs easier. We tend to talk the hardware. It's actually a lot of the other pieces that make their jobs harder. The other thing is really we're trying to figure out how to do space in places that haven't done space before. So obviously I talked about SpaceX. You mentioned Blue Origin. We really want the whole state to be involved in space, and how do we get it? It's not just, Ellington Field, Johnson Space Center. It's about using the resources that this whole state has, which are actually, an amazing opportunity for us, and being able to figure out then how to educate and be able to inform people in all these different regions that weren't typically space communities. What are the key things that you need to be setting up to be able to enable space in your area? It used to be that the government did that for everybody. We don't want the government to do that for everybody. We want the government to help and aid us and streamline, but we also want them to be able to partner with the commercial companies to do that as efficiently as possible.
No, and I think you mentioned two important areas that are very kind of dear to me, and that is the international aspect. I've got a slight accent, North Texas. But also the educational aspect, and I think that's one of the kind of signatures of this activity that you guys are kind of leading, is to bring the whole state into play, not just the research and the technology and the universities, but also get that workforce component going. And so I think that's really exciting. And as the guy who's doing all the kind of heavy lifting and the legwork here, Norman, maybe you could comment on that as well.
Sure. So back to the top of the question, the vibrancy of the economy here in Texas are these two ladies that are sitting here and the brands that they represent because of the technologies that their companies are working on. And they decided, their companies chose Texas as the location for their operations. So what does that look like for the bigger macro picture across the whole state? First off, the legislature, with the support of the governor, recognized that these companies are identifying Texas as the place to operate. That's the vibrancy. The bigger benefit for the whole state is all of those extra things that they were both talking about. Whether it's the training, whether it's the education, whether it's the grant program in particular to help drive that next innovation, that's what this Space Commission is trying to accomplish. We need the big ideas. But first off, we're solving for two things. Helping to make sure that those companies that have chosen to be in Texas today stay and help them to expand their existing footprint. And then secondly, for those companies that are seeing what's happening here, for them to sooner rather than later decide also they should have a presence somewhere in Texas, whether it's in the Rio Grande Valley, whether it's right here in Space City, whether it's up in the Metroplex, up and down the I-35 corridor, or an affiliation with any of our Tier 1 and other universities across the state that are working on some really incredible research projects. Things that are being developed in the classroom and in the laboratories here on Earth, but they're going to be actually expanded in terms of the research scope in zero gravity for the benefit of the rest of us mere mortals that will never leave this Earth. But hopefully the things that are recognized and developed not here on Earth will still benefit from it. So I think that's the real answer to the first part of your question of what's the bigger picture or the impact to the whole state.
So I'm actually amazed that these guys have been very brief, so we're actually ahead of schedule. So I'm going to give a pop quiz or give an answer question. I think the other thing that's important to remember is, so the Texas Space Commission is the kind of authorizing body, and some very high-profile people on that commission. The TARSEC, and I know Rob Ambrose, I don't know if Rob's over there, and myself and a few others are involved in the Texas Aerospace Research and Space Economy Consortium, of which potentially all of your organizations are a member. We're still working on those details. We've had a kind of late run into this too, but that's where you all can input. This is where you can you can contact the commission. We've been hosting a couple of workshops. We've got a couple more to come. You're all welcome to come and give us your views of where the state should go. So with that, how do you, and this could be any of you, because, but how do you see that interaction between the commission and the TARSEC, the executive committee, and then ultimately the consortium as a whole? How do you see that, and I'm sorry for springing this on you, but how do you see that working a little bit? Norman, maybe we can start with you.
Sure, I'll
again.
start with the legislative intent and why these two different groups of 9 were contemplated as part of the enabling legislation. First off, we needed a governing body for a new state agency, and that's the 9 who were appointed to the Space Commission Board of Directors. But there was also sort of a running joke early on, which was, is there one person that can write a one-pager about everything to do with commercial space industry issues in Texas? And of course, that answer is no. It's not one person, and it definitely doesn't fit on a one page. And so the bill author, Dr. Greg Bonin, MD, neurosurgeon from just down the road here from us today, decided that he wanted to ensure that there were additional voices who were part of the conversation when it came to what are the big ideas. And so this additional group of 9 were identified as an advisory group, people with incredible experiences. The expertise between the TARSEC Executive Committee and the Space Commission Board of Directors is unlike any other part of state government. First and foremost, I want to make sure everybody realizes it's not just a typical political appointment. These are folks that by law had to demonstrate certain capabilities and expertise. And so TARSEC, I describe as the knight in shining armor for the Texas Space Commission because they're not a governing body. They can convene. They have held 2 workshops already in November, one in San Antonio, one in Houston, and more are being planned across the state during calendar year 2025. But they are able to be much more flexible in organizing conversations, a lot like this one here, and then providing back through comments and formal documents to the Space Commission to incorporate into a strategic plan. The commission has to write a plan. The TARSEC Executive Committee is providing an annual report, and both have the opportunity to provide actual recommendations, be it legislation or prioritizing the next round of funding should the legislature opt to renew, whether it's 150 more or less to the Texas Space Commission for additional grants. Grants are made possible, very broadly defined, to eligible entities that have an existing presence in Texas, universities, governmental entities, private companies. So I highly encourage, if you haven't already, to go to our website, space.texas.gov. You can access our grant application. You can sign up for our email distribution list, and you can also provide input to a questionnaire for the strategic plan. All to say, TARSEC is a group that every university, college, 2-year, 4-year institution of higher education in Texas can send a name, their local campus liaison, to participate in the conversations moving forward. That's very important.
Thank you. And I don't know if any of the commissioners here would like to say anything or what they would like to see from TARSEC as a whole, you know, without putting you on the spot, Kathy.
Oh, so I think what's really interesting is we're starting out, and to me the most important feature of TARSEC that Norman brought up was that flexibility, because what you do find out when you're a state commission is there's a lot of rules, and you got to figure out how to operate within those rules to be able to meet, you know, Open Meetings Act, obviously the fiduciary responsibilities you have for the state. But then to be able to have an arm that can go and have the further conversations, do the research work, be able to bring in those ideas, and honestly help us figure it out. You know, where we are today, from a commission standpoint, I actually view that our roles will evolve over time as the maturity of the commission comes in place, and as the needs of the community that we're serving also evolve and come into place. You know, what we're serving and needing to have in the state of Texas, I'm hoping will be very different in 10 years, and in 15 years, and in 20 years. And when that happens, the nice thing about having TARSEC is that they're able to be out there in the community, being able to get that access to that information to help us be making the right decisions for the right time.
All right, well, thank you. That brought us up to our schedule, so I'm good. So I'll try not to do that again, but we'll see. So again, what we want to emphasize is the purpose of pumps and pipes, right? So we have the real focus here is cross collaboration. We're in the medical center, obviously. We're in the, I mean, I know it's a little bit Houston-centric here, but we have the energy capital of the world. We have the world's biggest medical center. We have the NASA Johnson Space Center. Now we're trying to take that excitement and cross the state with it. So given that Pumps and Pipes focuses on cross-sector collaboration, how do you envisage the aerospace investments by the state impacting adjacent technology sectors? And I think we're going to start with you, Kathy, on this one.
Well, you know, I think I was just one of the perfect examples where I was just talking to Rob, and Rob talked about the fact that here we had a medical device solution that helped an oil company solve one of their problems. Guess what? Arteries have different sizes for different systems, but if you can figure out how to get access to different areas, guess what? You potentially can then take that idea and apply it somewhere else. It's honestly what within NASA we tried to preach for years. We would say, look, all the things we're learning in space actually help you here on Earth, you know, I mean, and there's no better way to do that actually than to have companies actually demonstrating that as they're out there taking what may be their aerospace solution and then working with businesses across the board to be able to apply that solution to solve a problem that they have. I've always said government sucks at business development, but what's really, really important is when the government procures things in a different way and allows the companies to own their IP, their intellectual property, then that enables that company to offer that intellectual property as a solution to somebody else. And that, to me, is a huge innovation, David. That's a huge innovation.
Norman?
So speaking of going to a lot of conferences and different parts of the state, there was one up in North Texas that I recently attended, and I was on a panel with Dr. Matthews, Walter Sparky Matthews. He was the first Surgeon General for the U.S. Space Force. He's at Baylor University College of Medicine in Waco. And the conversation about what is the nexus between space and medicine and energy and different other technologies was, he posed a question, and I personally had not thought about it before he asked the group there. Maybe this room has a lot more MD type medical experts in the room, but the question he asked was, how could you conduct surgery in space? If you open the body, things come out and they're going to float. I mean, he was putting it much more theoretical and much more medical than I am here currently, but coming up with those kinds of solutions, depending on what the real opportunities are here in the near term, midterm, long term of space travel, what does it mean for the humans that are going to be in the different far distances that can't still experience the same kind of treatments and other procedures that we're used to here? Granted, it's probably not the first time a room was asked the question. It's the first time that I really stopped and think about it. But he, with his expertise, as a military veteran, as an MD, as a professor, and his time starting up the Space Force, started to bring up examples of the kinds of tools that are going to be required and what kind of materials need to make them and what sizes should they be. And to Kathy's example of the right kind of things that can help solve for other problems at the same time, he really expanded that question beyond just theory. And I think it's going to be more folks like him and those kinds of questions, and hopefully people like y'all here in this room that will help create those answers sooner rather than later.
Interesting.
Yeah, so there's a couple of technologies that have enabled Venus to be successful that I feel like there have to be some applications in other industries. And probably the largest one is additive manufacturing. So we literally 3D print our rocket engines. And rocket engines back in the day took out like years to develop because you had to put them in an ion bath, and it was a slow process. So one of the reasons we haven't seen a lot of innovation in aerospace until I feel like recently is the invention of 3D metal printing. I mean, you lay a level of powder, and then you laser weld it, and you lay a level, and you can literally additively print rocket engines, which means we can additively print things hopefully in space someday. I mean, if we could get up onto the moon, and then, what kind of materials and things that we can actually start building there? Because once you're there, if you can get the raw resources there's a bunch of things on the moon. Another thing is just the lightweight ceramics and high-strength alloys. There's been an incredible amount of innovation in material science that I think would have implications for oil and gas, for energy, for medical. And then one of my favorite things that's happening in space, and I am not an expert in this at all, but is pharmaceutical manufacturing in space. So with low gravity or no gravity, you can build absolutely perfect spheres and perfect crystals. And there's a bunch of companies that are starting to do pharmaceutical research and pharmaceutical development where they send things up into space and it's manufactured and then brought back down to Earth. I'm not an expert by this in any means, but I've just seen some stories. And I would encourage you to go look up what's happening in space with pharmaceutical manufacturing, because their drug delivery and drug formation it's like literally world changing of how you can build things, manufacture in space. The other piece that I've seen, and SpaceX is an incredible example of this, is the sheer automation. You guys, they caught a second stage rocket with toothpicks. And Kathy's probably way better to talk about this, but the machine learning and the data, the sheer amount of data. So I can tell you that when we were at Virgin Orbit, the fastest way we would run an engine test out in Mojave in the middle of the desert. The fastest way and it would generate terabytes of data. The fastest way to get it back to our propulsion engineers at our headquarters in Long Beach was to put it on a hard drive and drive it back. It is incredible amounts of data that we generate. We have thousands of sensors looking at pressure and temperatures. And so the machine learning, the AI, the ability to take that data, quickly process it, make decisions. I know that's one of the things that SpaceX is one of the world's best. They go do something and they can track all that data, make a change, and launch again. And so how do we take advantage of that in the energy industry, in the medical industry? I think there's incredible things happening. I think you've seen it with satellites. People are making farming decisions based on satellite data of what's going on in their fields. You can just process all the things that have been happening globally with, unfortunately, some of the wars. They can instantly see what's happening. And so there's just incredible innovation that's happening from the aerospace industry that I think has huge impacts across the rest of the industries.
Yeah, and we're ahead of time again. Is there any other comments before I start bumping my gums and give you another pop quiz? I think our panelists have mentioned a bunch of things. In particular, if you think about, a lot of us think about, if you're not in the space industry, space is about going to space. But it's, as Sassy pointed out, it's a lot more than that now. If you think about us wanting to go to the moon, we have to get there. We're taking humans, which means we need to worry about their health and the medical technologies that we need to support that. We're going to be mining water so that we can use that on the moon. So that's where the energy industry comes in. So we really need all the solutions that we can bring in, all the innovation that we can bring in from the different disciplines that are represented here and beyond. And so I think that's a key aspect for you to think about. It's not somebody else's tool set, or if I'm using the right words, Alan, toolkit. It's not someone else's toolkit. We need everybody's toolkit to bring that to bear. And I think the innovation is another key element. And maybe I'll just do that before we go on to our last question, which is back to the Space Commission. How do you see us taking advantage, and again, I apologize for the unprompted version of this, but how do you see us, given what we're trying to do and all of you are trying to do, the community's trying to do in space, how do we take advantage of the innovation that's happening across the state in these different disciplines? How can we kind of elevate that a little bit so that we can get to use it a little bit more? Pumps and pipes is a good example, but it's a very local thing generally. I don't know who wants to take that on, or if anybody wants to take it on, but innovation.
Well, I think your question is about the interconnectedness of these innovative ideas. And so I think one thing that the state can probably help to do is make sure that there's as many threading the needles as possible rather than silos and fiefdom building, if you will. Granted, it's real easy to make sure that everybody is doing what their main objective is, but when we can really harness the benefits of some friendly competition, whether it's through universities or private sector companies, I really do think that will help Texas stand out and be in a better position than other countries or other states around the country, but also other countries around the world in particular. And here's an example. Oftentimes when the legislature, and sorry, I'm going to give the example back to just at the state level here with funding, here's the same request from different parts of the state, whether it's from a government or a university. The first question is, well, is it duplicative? And the second question is, are you partnering with anybody else? And if you say, it might be a little duplicative, but here's why it's unique, and no, I'm not partnering with anybody else, that usually falls on deaf ears. And so if what the state can do to help really drive that innovation is thread the needle across the different themes and help everybody understand that there's room in the sandbox for everybody and that resources will be made available, and then the whole state moves in the same direction, maybe there's going to be more of those different companies like what these ladies represent come here to Texas that helps to hire more people, build more infrastructure, and really make a big impact in multiple regions across the state.
Thank you. Anyone else? So our last question before we open it to the audience is, it's a little bit back more to the goals of the commission and so on, but again, there's a lot of focus on the funding that's available, and there's a word R for research, but research means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so, I'll touch on some things if you don't already, but so can you speak a little bit about the strategic planning efforts of the Space Commission and the TARSEC? And what can you say at present? I know we're all working on our strategic plans and so on, but what can you say about the priorities and and I know you've all touched on this in some way, but perhaps we can kind of finish off. I'd like to finish off with workforce development, but if we can finish off with some comments about what our priorities are going forward and how we can get everyone engaged.
So we've got a couple of documents that we're going to be working with. The Space Commission will have a strategic plan that is primarily focused on promoting economic development opportunities. First and foremost, that is truly what the Space Commission was was created to do. And so those are in themes, space in general, aeronautics, and aviation. It should include some specific projects or priorities in terms of the kinds of things that should continue to get funded, not with the existing amount of money, but hopefully with new funds as well. Whereas the TARSEC strategic plan is going to focus on what the purpose of their consortium is, where it needs to go to also help position the state in terms of the conversation, the narrative moving forward, but be specific with actual recommendations, both legislative updates like statutory requirements or regulatory changes that can be useful to the industry writ large, as well as the focus areas for funding as well. And then lastly, they also need to create a report, a biennial report that will look over moving into time, a 2-year look back on exactly what activities have been undertaken by the TARSEC group, not just the executive committee, but there's 200 plus institutions of higher education around Texas. All of them were invited to provide a name as their local campus liaison. I think we've only received a third of responses out of that to date, and so we're really hopeful that all of these different institutions, whether they're the 2 years or the 4 years across the state, also help to contribute towards what their local region wants to do when it comes to space. There's been a couple of examples shared so far, and I'll keep it anonymous, but there's an example in Texas whereby there's a local city who has put up their own dollars to help create a facility for a private industry on city-owned land to do some innovation that is tied also to national defense strategies. I mean, that's like all of the boxes getting checked almost. And so more of these conversations that can take place in different parts of the state, I think will also be very valuable sooner rather than later.
Sassy?
Yeah, one of the great things Texas has is the ability, from technicians. Like, you were talking about workforce development, and I think that's critical. At Venus, we need PhD rocket scientists that literally have come from Texas A&M, University of Texas, Rice, all the way down to folks that have, just work with their hands on a daily basis. I mean, the skilled labor is absolutely critical. In fact, I think we need more skilled labor than we need brains. My husband would probably disagree with me, but he's the PhD. So, and so that full workforce development is absolutely crucial. And I think as the state continues to look at how do we push that forward, and then also with that, kind of those industry academic partnerships. I think it's crucial what's happening at the universities and what's happening at the kind of trade schools, like Sanjak here in Houston has, that they're dear to my heart because we've hired quite a few technicians that have been trained in kind of composites or in, the groups running our rocket engine test stand. Some of those people came out of Sanjak. And I will say that's actually one of my favorite things about being in Houston and in Texas is one of the things when we moved to Houston, folks said, but you're not going to have the machinists that know how to do aerospace grade quality work. You're not going to have the operators. But we've been able to take, who's good at really high temperature, high pressure fluids? Chemical plant operators, oil and gas operators. And those are now the people that are running our rocket engine test stand. And so Houston and Texas has the ecosystem to do it. Some of it, the jobs just didn't exist. And so I'm excited to see what Texas and the Texas Space Commission can continue to do to leverage that ecosystem and that talent that's here and continue to absolutely grow it.
Kathy?
Yeah. So I also want to kind of emphasize that 9 people on a commission aren't going to change the world. Like, this has got to take all of us owning a piece of this, right? It doesn't really help for just Sanjak to be there developing or the local community colleges developing if there's not companies pulling on that workforce, because then you really need that downstream partnership to really make that whole life cycle chain work, right? It's just going to frustrate people if you promise them aerospace jobs or different, and you don't have the aerospace companies there. So it's really, really important what Norman was saying, that it's about thinking about the whole value chain and looking at how do you get partnerships in the area. But I also think Kathy's point about unique partnerships is really key. One of the best talent pools for building pads is actually oil fields. People that understand how to build high pressure systems that need to be reliable and be maintained long term. Guess what we found out? Our best source of welders is tattoo artists. So I never would have thought that, but it's a good thing. I see so many people with all different colors. I'm like, great, where are you doing your artwork? Because I may be visiting that local parlor, and that person may not be there the next time.
There are some health implications for that too,
exactly.
so that's good.
I know. I think, the point here is to be thinking about the connections and not saying that that's not an aerospace application. That's not a source of aerospace. Actually, this state is full of resources that are needed for us to be able to really do our mission. And we've got to figure out really how to help pull in the connections.
No, I think that's really important, and I think the idea of what infrastructure do we have and what infrastructure do we need to do exactly what our panel has said, which is to keep the companies here, to attract more companies here, that then drives the demand for the workforce that then the universities come in and do, on top of all these fancy ideas and research and so on. So we have about 10 minutes left for questions. I think there's someone with a roving mic, I believe. The lady over there, and there's a gentleman over here. So if you have a question for any of our panelists, please don't be shy. We want your input, and we want your questions, and we want your ideas. Who's going to be a brave? Oh, there we go, sir.
Hey, good morning. This question is for, Catherine and, I'm going to get the names right here. Siggy? So my question is, how can Methodist and other TMC institutions, could they collaborate with Venus Aerospace on predictive maintenance of critical medical equipment?
So I think it's about maintenance and bringing in I think the medical center you're interested in. And
Correct.
That's a great question. I mean,
Because you've got the data. It sounds like you've got the data, and you've got it, like a big data sort of high velocity, high volume, high variety. So you've got that part of it.
Yeah. So, and Venus is we're still a pretty early stage R&D company. And so, as we continue to grow and scale, I mean, some of the challenges are going to be, it's one thing for us to build one engine, but it's another thing for us to go build 1,000. And so my question would be, what are the practices that you guys have found in quality assurance and QA that have allowed you to produce medical grade devices at scale? And I think those applications would rotate straight back into what we're doing at Venus. And so so we 3D print one engine right now and go test it. Well, what happens if we're 3D printing 1,000? Could we batch test those? And are there best practices within the industry that would allow us to do that? I think there's incredible opportunities. Like, let's have a discussion. I don't know where it would go, but we are at the very bleeding edge. I mean, we're only a 3-year-old company, and so we've taken engine technology out of academia and have gotten it to this point, and we're on that point of hopefully, a rocket ship growth legit. Right. And so we're right at that spot where it's like, okay, how do we use AI? How do we use machine learning? How do we use the best practices from within the industry to take this technology, and let's not use 1980s methodologies, let's use 2025 methodologies to really allow us to grow and scale. And I can say that even, our ultimate goal is to build a commercial plane that could do San Francisco to Tokyo. The practices of manufacturing planes, I was actually up at a aerospace manufacturing facility in Tulsa, and it is so hand labor intensive when they're doing composites. And I looked at that and I thought, no wonder, the industry hasn't. But they said this piece was allowed to be built by FAA standards in this process, and this is what passed, and so they don't want to change it. And so there's an incredible opportunity for taking, how do you take the old technologies and the old methodologies and move it into, 2025 and into the future.
Thank you very much. One quick comment for Dr. Alexander. I sat next to a lady on a plane who was full of tattoos years ago, and she asked me what I thought. We got talking. I said, well, my first thought was hepatitis. And she said that the way that tattoo parlors are regulated is actually far more specialized and far more, they're much better regulated than ORs. I thought that was interesting. So
yeah, I've got a couple of kids who are looking into that. I'll get back to you on that.
Okay.
And I'm waiting for the Houston to Glasgow Venus flight, by the way, just so you know. Kathy, was there anything, because obviously SpaceX is a human component and you have a lot of heritage in that aspect. To the point of view of the medical devices and the looking after of the payload, which in this case is a human, how do you see that?
Well, I think Cassie did a really good job. We right at Starbase right now we're kind of in the same place. We're trying to figure out at the very beginning, we're actually uniquely did not go and take our Falcon 9 processes and bring them over to Starbase. We said we're going to come down, we're actually going to go back to scratch and then add the additional rigor that we need to have from a vehicle perspective, just so that you don't come in with overloaded processes at the very beginning. But over time, in the same way, these conversations about how do you go take that data and then work to refine it and figuring out which parts of your process are actually helping you the most, because then that actually starts helping you wean out processes that may not be helpful for you too. So obviously, if people understand how to do that, that would be a great conversation at some point to have. Because what I see people do is they do what they've always done, and they don't necessarily know which part of it helps them or hurts them. And so it's really that weaning out of the things that you don't need to do that's probably one of the most important things, along with figuring out which are the really essential parts of the process to do.
And I think, if you think NASA selects like 8 people from 18,000 applicants, most of those 18,000 applicants probably already think they've got a shot, so they're already pretty high level. But when you start thinking about flying anyone who can buy a ticket, you want to select as many people as possible, and so the health issues kind of come in, and all those studies need to be done. I'm looking for other hands. I don't know if there's any other questions. There's one here. This gentleman here, yeah, there you go. The microphone's coming to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much for a great panel. And I work in healthcare, and I agree with the statements made early about government, as a source of innovation versus the private sector, et cetera. And of course, that changed everything for us in healthcare innovation in the 80s, with Bayh-Dole and so forth. And when we're innovating from healthcare, of course, we're looking to make a business case, and we need to be able to quickly describe things like the return on investment or the total available market or the total accessible market. And as I listened and learned so much from what you described, part of me is really conservative and thinks that I don't understand the total accessible market, or the return on investment seems so long, or that the product would be reserved for such a select, expensive base of customers, and probably that's all wrong. Could you help me understand the business case for starting up in space that's really compelling and not out of reach?
Yeah, I can attack that one. So currently, the global space market is about a $450 to $500 billion per year market, and it's on its way by the mid-2030s to be estimated around a $1 trillion market. And so it's growing incredibly fast. One of the reasons that space is growing so quickly is our ability to get more payloads to space much quicker. And so SpaceX has done an incredible job with driving the cost of kilograms, like the cost of space. And you have to think about, honestly, rockets are it's just a railroad system. And so, you're putting something on the railroad and you're sending it to space. And if it's much cheaper to put something on the railroad and to get it to space, then it opens up incredible opportunities that have never even existed before. And so a lot of the current space market has been driven by like GPS and satellites and telecom and that kind of thing. But we are just at that very, very cutting edge of what's going to happen in the industry.
I really think it's not about, I think the error people make is, what am I going to be doing in space and selling in space? And in a lot of cases, it's how do I use space to look at my problem here on Earth differently? So Norman's question about how do I do surgery? I mean, honestly, when we started doing robotic surgery here on Earth, that also started to solve a problem potentially that we could do if we have people going. I mean, you're starting to have smaller openings. Guess what? When you're not opening somebody up all the way, less stuff starts coming out, right? I mean, so there's this, when you start asking the question about how could I either learn in some way by taking my product to space and understanding some aspect of it, or how can I, if I think about how to do this in space, does it help me then solve the problem differently here on Earth? I think learning and thinking for your Earthbound company, how could I use space to get me to think about it differently? Because like Sassy was saying, Sassy was saying, the cost of going to space has gone down, and people are starting to also think about how to use space differently. When people used to do research at the National Space Station, they used to almost treat it like, here's my lab on Earth, and I'm going to take it up. And then people start realizing, well, hang on a second, I want to be able to do actually start a protocol and then be able to adjust my protocol because I have this very precious time up in space. And so over the last year and a half, people started to actually fly tissue chips because then they could assess different protocols on orbit and have the crews be able to assess it. And then with the cloud computing capability, you could store your data up there rather than doing an experiment, bringing it down. But because people started to think about how do I maybe do research differently, then it created an opportunity for people to be able to do their research even here differently on Earth. Colloidal research. She talked about drug therapies, but we ended up finding out that just the way items disperse in space, it helped people better define the delivery system for the COVID, the nasal vaccine, for example. So it's just a way to say, hey, I'm going to stick something in this environment. What's my problem? And is there a way not to also, but to use space to be able to help you be able to do what you need to do here on Earth? And then that kind of keeps that cycle of innovation going because we're taking that learning and then being able to apply it here and potentially having a better product here on Earth.
I'll take a shot at this, but back to your comment specifically about a business case for, as an example of the models under which certain investments might be made. The state has opted to do something very, I'm going to say basic, something that they're used to doing, which is offering grants. Something that it's more novel for conversation's sake right now is what if resources were made available beyond just grants? What if there was an opportunity for certain kinds of innovation to offer the state something like an equity share or something with an ROI back for whatever that potential grant or other color of cash might be to help really move the ball or move the needle when it comes to that innovation? There are other states that offer that. And there are some here in Texas that are starting to begin that conversation. Think things like New Mexico, Idaho, the Dakotas, Colorado, other parts of the country, but other countries around the world that utilize models of sovereign wealth funds to help with this kind of equity when it comes to the major industry sectors. Not just space, as an example here, Sassy mentioned biopharma. There's other things like semiconductors in terms of the legacy that Texas has always had when it comes to that market as well. But other things that could really still be driving innovation that the state could potentially continue to provide resources under something other than just a straight grant program.
And I think to follow up on that, I think there's a common misconception that we're talking about doing stuff for space. And I think Kathy made it very clear, as did Sassy, is that it's a resource, not necessarily just a destination. The way I like to say it, and SpaceX might have a different number in mind here, but right now we have plans to send maybe 4 humans to Mars sometime in the next 40 years. That's not a market. But if we can successfully do that and bring them back safely, there are 8 billion people on the planet that will benefit from the technologies that allowed that to happen. That's the innovation that we're looking for. That's the kind of ideas that, given the constraints of doing anything in space, it makes whatever you have on Earth better. Because you need less power, smaller form factor, multifunctional capability, all these different things that innovation helps drive. Space provides the challenges. The market is on the ground. I think for a lot of these technologies, space will benefit, but especially when there's a human involved on the medical side, the market is on the planet Earth for that innovation. I think we have time for one last quick question, if there is anyone. There's one over here. Marion?
Yeah, this was going back to the discussions you guys had about workforce development, and specifically, you guys both touched on the machining, welding, other kinds of hands-on capabilities. For those technical capabilities, we obviously have a lot in the oil and gas, like commercial real estate, stuff like that happening. How do you see the Texas Space Commission's job not just transitioning that workforce, but enabling it to be perhaps, as David just suggested, multi-capable, where it's working both and certified in both the FAA certifications, but also keeping that oil and gas heritage?
Anyone want to take that?
So one of the things that one of our board members, her name is Dr. Heather Wilson. She happens to be the president of the University of Texas at El Paso, former secretary of the Air Force Academy grad herself. Oftentimes she begins a conversation with saying, okay, but what are we not doing? It's one thing to talk about what we want to do, but there's very clear conversations that need to be had early on what is not our lane. So we're not the Higher Education Coordinating Board. We're not the Workforce Commission. We're not local ISDs. What are we not? But to your point of what we could be a platform for is perpetuating the school of thought around all of these different disciplines, all of these different certificates, all of these different training requirements that would be useful when it comes to the companies that want to hire said person with these skills, whether it's being transferred from one industry sector to the other, or here's a new thing, and it's not really new, but it's just an additional thing rather. Certain universities in the state are also helping to not just educate students for the right kind of career path, train them with the right certifications, but also perhaps help them to begin their security clearances before they even graduate. That's a differential. So if what the Space Commission can do is be the platform to describe what those needs are, then those other bodies within state government maybe can then hear that demand and say, okay, this is our lane. This is what the Space Commission is saying, and this is how the Coordinating Board will help solve, or the Workforce Commission will help solve, or other parts of state government can help solve, to then make sure that what is needed is available at the end of the day.
Anything to add? So with that, thank you for your questions. I'd like to give each of our panelists just a few seconds to give a final remark or final comment, and I'll work that way again. So Kathy, maybe we can have you just say goodbye to everybody in whatever way you would like to.
Was I first?
You're first.
Okay,
I'm just going backwards. Yeah.
I really can't emphasize that we need your brain power thinking about things, right, and the connections, because I just have learned that, you know, it's that really varied viewpoint, and look at the problems that you're trying to solve that really helps us then come up with new uses and lenses for our activities that we're doing. I was just at a conference this last week, and what really struck me was, for the first time, I wasn't talking to a bunch of engineers. I was talking to historians. I was talking to political science majors. I was talking to lawyers. And it was, to me, it reminded me a lot of going to the ITU like 15 years ago, 30 years ago. 30 years ago was a whole bunch of engineers. 10 years ago, if you go to the ITU now, it is lawyers, it is business people, it is people that know where space is going, how it's being used, and why it's important for them to have their business case. And so I do feel like people are starting to recognize that there's value out there, and it's really, really important for you to be bringing to the table where you feel like you could get value from either thinking about your problem and solving it in space, or using space as a way to look at your problem here on Earth differently.
Sassy?
Yeah, you know, we are at the verge as a society of, you know, an absolute explosion, not really an explosion, but absolute explosion into the space economy. I think we're going to look back in 20, 30 years and just be absolutely blown away. And so all of you guys sitting here in this room, I mean, it's the very beginning. Don't think it's like we've been doing this only 50 years and in the big picture of civilization. I mean, we are at the very, very, very beginning stages. And so there are incredible opportunities within the industry. I would also encourage you, so I was a biomedical engineering major. I thought I was going to medical school, and suddenly I'm sitting here as the CEO of an aerospace company. And so, you know, don't be afraid of aerospace. Don't be afraid of, you know, you can go learn. If you're sitting in this room, you are obviously a learner and you're interested. And so those opportunities are there, and we need all different pieces of the industry to make this happen. I will say my favorite analogy that I've heard is space. We're kind of at that like space tobacco stage right now. So why was America finally colonized? It was because of the tobacco, growth in Virginia, that all of a sudden you had a cash crop that you could send back, and that's what actually helped grow America as a country. And I think we are just at that very, very early stage where there's a cash crop that's coming that is just going to create an absolute incredible amount of growth. And so, be curious, get involved, ask questions, and excited to see where this industry goes.
Norman, it's all yours, man.
I'm going to repeat myself, sorry, but the last plug is the website. It's pretty cool to say, space.texas.gov, and you can do 3 things there. Sign up for our email distribution list, participate in our online questionnaire for the strategic plan, and also access our grant applications, space.texas.gov. Thanks for having us.
And also feel free to reach out to the TASEC members. There's a couple of them here today, and there's more of us. So thank you very much for that really interesting conversation. Please join me in thanking our panel.